As you could see from the images on our screen, President Kennedy and Mrs. Kennedy loved baseball. And several of the items from our archives tell the story of President Kennedy's career as a player and a fan. On February 27, 1962, at the peak of spring training, a White House assistant sent a message to the head of the Secret Service that, quote, "The President asks that his baseball equipment be kept at Hyannisport for use this summer." Maybe he had some inkling that he might be called up to help Boston at the end of the pennant race. Like most of us, President Kennedy hated to lose. His longtime friend and assistant Dave Powers once remembered a summer day in 1946 at Fenway Park when he and Jack Kennedy were watching Ted Williams come to bat. As Powers wrote in his book, "Johnny, We Hardly Knew You," Jack asked me what the odds were against Williams hitting a homer. 15-1, I said, ever the statistician. Jack offered $10 to 1 that Williams wouldn't hit a home run, and I took the bet. I leaped on his first swing, Williams drove the ball deep into the left field stands. I leaped to my feet, cheering wildly along with everyone else in the park except Jack Kennedy, who sat in his seat with his head bowed, so downhearted at losing the bet that he didn't speak to me for the next 2 innings. Now, we all know that baseball is one of the things that unites Americans, except perhaps Bostonians and New Yorkers occasionally. And today we're here to celebrate that wonderful fact. From presidents to ordinary citizens, baseball tells the story of America. And as we know, it's a story of struggle and triumph with many sad chapters as well as happy ones. On July 1st, 1960, President Kennedy wrote a letter to Jackie Robinson reflecting on one of the saddest of those chapters. After meeting with Robinson, he spoke of the continuing struggle to fulfill the American promise of equal opportunity for all, noting that saying these things is not enough. What is required is leadership. This is not just a matter of law, for great moral issues are involved. And I think as the story of Jackie Robinson shows, baseball is one of those places in which these great issues are played out, since baseball in many ways is not only our national pastime, but also a mirror in which we can see ourselves as a nation. Today we bring you an extraordinary team of all-stars who will show us what Major League Baseball looks like from the inside and help us understand what it is about baseball that casts such a spell on us. From players to owners to writers, baseball always seems to produce the best, and that's what our remarkable panel represents here on the Kennedy Library stage. 5 days before opening day, we're extremely fortunate to have with us 2 members of the Red Sox front office leadership. Before introducing my friend Larry Lucchino, the Red Sox president and CEO, I'd like to recognize the team's principal owner, John Henry, who may not have been able to arrive here yet, but who will be with us soon and who has done so much over the last 2 years to inspire hope in what is known as the Red Sox Nation. When Larry Lucchino and I were in law school together, Larry's reputation as a scholar athlete was based solidly on his flawless record of shooting paper baskets in the library. Larry, you've come a long way. A veteran of 24 years as a leader in Major League Baseball, Larry Lucchino has taken 3 cities, Baltimore, San Diego, and now Boston, by storm, spurring the Orioles, the Padres, and now the Red Sox to the top of their games and their leagues, stimulating dramatic increases in attendance and building state-of-the-art new ballparks, or, in the case of Fenway, giving us the monster seats. Larry and his partners have also done a terrific job of building bridges to the Boston community, establishing the Red Sox Foundation and starting a new program called the Red Sox Scholars, which helps Boston students pay for college. Jerry Remy is a household name to Red Sox fans throughout New England and across the country. Affectionately known as the Rem Dog, Jerry became the voice of the Sox behind the microphone of the New England Sports Network beginning in 1988, following his 7 seasons as Boston's second baseman. Born and raised in Somerset, Massachusetts, Jerry began his career with the California Angels, but really got going when a 1977 trade brought him back to home territory with the Red Sox, where he made the 1978 All-Star team before going on to his All-Star career as a sportscaster. Roger Angell is a baseball legend. In the spring of 1962, when President Kennedy was having his equipment shipped to Hyannisport, Roger was sent to Florida by the editor of The New Yorker to capture the magic of spring training. 42 years later, no one has written better about the game, and probably no one knows more about what it makes to make what it is that makes it so special. As Pulitzer Prize-winning sports writer Richard Ford has observed in reviewing Roger's recent book, Game Time, there's no writer I know whose writing on sport, and particularly baseball, is as anticipated, as often reread, and passed from hand to hand by knowledgeable enthusiasts as Roger Angell's is. In Boston, where baseball emotions perhaps run deeper than the Atlantic Ocean, is a long tradition of great sports writing. And tonight we have with us one of the finest representatives of that tradition, our own Dan Shaughnessy, sports columnist for the Boston Globe. Author of the baseball classic, The Curse of the Bambino, Dan has his finger on the pulse of every Red Sox fan, and his pen has chronicled every moment of euphoria and despair while always keeping hope alive. To coax the mysteries of baseball out of this wonderful panel of experts, we are very fortunate to have with us tonight as our moderator one of America's best-known journalists, Charles Gibson, co-anchor of ABC News Good Morning America. Charlie began his career with... There's where the true sympathies lie. Wonderful. He began his career with ABC News in 1975 and has covered many, many things since. And he's famous for his interviews of leaders around the world, from Nelson Mandela to Tony Blair to Yasser Arafat, and for his in-depth coverage of American politics and culture. But he is also, most importantly tonight, an avid baseball fan. 2 nights before Mark McGwire, for example, hit his record-breaking 67 home run of the season in September 1998, Charlie anchored from Cooperstown an ABC News primetime special, Chasing History, which is also, I think, a good subtitle for tonight's forum. So please join me in welcoming to the stage in the Kennedy Library Larry Lucchino, Jerry Remy, Roger Angell, Dan Shaughnessy, and Charlie Gibson batting cleanup.
I want to thank John for that introduction, which can be summed up very quickly. John's introduction was, we have 4 experts and Charlie Gibson. I come to you from New York. The staff on the floor at Good Morning America, when they found out I was going up to Boston to do a panel on baseball, one of the cameramen asked me to wear his hat. The hat says simply 1918. I am not wearing the hat today. I told him I would not wear the hat today. If I'm not in focus tomorrow, you know why. Moderators in panels like this really serve no function other than to say, here's Dan, here's Roger. And I won't impose myself much on this, but I do serve a news function. I'm a newsman by training, and I had a feeling that George Steinbrenner was not going to stand pat, having lost the first game of the season. And indeed, I checked the wires a half an hour ago. You may not know what has happened today. And so I want to read you the latest bulletin from the Associated Press. It pushed as an urgent a half an hour ago, and I'm going to quote it. The New York Yankees have shored up their pitching, hitting, and defense today after losing their first game by signing every player in professional baseball. This is off the AP. We'd like to welcome the entire roster of Major League Baseball into the Yankee family, said team owner George Steinbrenner, watching as the franchise's 928 newest names were put on the board. This is not entirely unexpected, New York Times baseball writer Murray Chass said. When the Yankees annexed Cuba for use as a AAA farm club, it was clear Steinbrenner would do what he had to do to win. It's an honor to be part of this team, said newly signed catcher Javi Lopez, signed off the roster of the Baltimore Orioles. I stand ready in case Jorge Posada, Ivan Rodriguez, and Mike Piazza and 4 other guys go down. Just being number 8 on the depth chart is an honor on this club. Yankees manager Joe Torre, whose pitching rotation prior to the mass signing lacked a clear 14th ace, now has the luxury of starting each of his hurlers twice a season. If we make it to the series, said Torre, I plan to start Pedro and still have him fresh and ready to go in game 146 should it be necessary. Even though I have Bonds, Sosa, Pedro, and Randy Johnson now, don't think it's going to be easy, added Torre. Some of our fans think the Yankees are the only team in baseball. Now that we truly are, the pressure is going to be even greater. The Yankee payroll as of today has expanded from $190 million to $5.6 billion. Among other acquisitions, the Yankees bought out the remainder of Manny Ramirez's $160 million contract for $200 million. Baseball Commissioner Bud Selig approved the signings. I see no reason why a small market team like the Twins or the Expos can't continue to remain competitive just because they lack players, said Selig. They won't be much weaker than they were last year. That's the end of the bulletin from the AP. That's actually a lift from the Onion, and I thank them for it, but indeed it's pretty close to true. I join you now actually today for 3 reasons. Number 1, because like you, I have a lifelong love of the game of baseball. Born in the days when I would play 3-on-3 until after dusk with a taped-up baseball. And also born of the time that I saw a major league field for the first time and gasped, and I still do, I think, like everyone else, when I walk into a major league stadium. Number 2, I was in the brand new, then called DC Stadium, when John F. Kennedy threw out the first pitch in April of 1962. I still have the scorecard. The Senators beat the Detroit Tigers that day 4-1. It was the last game the Washington Senators won that year, but that's okay. Today may be the last game the Tampa Bay Devil Rays win, too. And number 3, I am a fan of all of these people. I am very lucky in that a courier brings me the New Yorker magazine on Sunday night. I don't have to wait till Monday, and the first thing I do is look in each edition to see if there's an article by Roger Angell. And when there is, well, happiness is a New Yorker edition with an article by him. Larry Lucchino, who had the guts to call the Yankees the evil empire. He carries the banner for all of us who want to knock off arrogant top dogs. Take that, Matt and Katie. And also 2 of the reasons that I am very pleased my wife and I have a place on Cape Cod. One of the true delights in life is the Boston Globe sports section, and Dan's contributions to it are most important. And also, and this is true, I have no interest when I'm on vacation at ever looking at television. But I buy the damn cable package just so I can listen to Jerry Remy call the games. I told him he owes me $41.16 a month. For a while, I was getting Adelphia free, and then they found out I was getting it. Now I have to pay for it. Anyway, I think he, along with Joe Morgan and Tim McCarver, do as good a job of analyzing a game as anybody around. Let me just give you a brief sense of the structure of the day, and then I will get out of the way. We're going to start just with a brief statement from each. I'm going to try to break this into about 10, 12-minute blocks. We'll get a brief statement from each of our panelists about their feeling of the state of the game today, what endures for them, what has changed, they think, for good and ill, what worries them about the game, and if they'd like to illustrate it with a story or 2 that you can go home and then say, Jerry Remy was telling me just the other day, that would be nice as well. And then I'm going to put forth some general propositions about the game today, somewhat reflecting my own feelings, but some general propositions, and I will ask each of them to comment. We'll do 4 of those, about 10 minutes each, and then we'll have about 25 minutes, I think, for questions from all of you. And when you do ask questions, we'll ask you to come up to these microphones that are conveniently placed in the aisles, in which there's probably a 50% chance they work. So let me start with getting a sort of topic statement from each, the state of the game today, as I outlined, and let me start on my right with Roger Angell.
Thank you, Charlie. I never think about the state of the game because it doesn't make for very good writing, I think. I'm always worried about baseball. In the winter, I'm always worried that I'm not going to be enthusiastic when the season starts. And as I get closer, I can feel myself beginning to wake up a little bit. And I think something new is about to happen. And something in baseball is always something that's never happened before, and it's happened already in this season, which is that with a full season to go before the Red Sox opening day, the Yankees are a half game behind. Never before in baseball history has this happened. Enjoy the moment. I don't know. I think that everything has changed so much. I've been writing baseball for 40 years, and almost everything has changed except the game itself, which out there in the middle is almost exactly the way it was, except that it's better played now than it ever was back then. Much better played now. At least the athletes are much, much better. I think I worry about the same things that all of us do, which is too much money. Crowds are too big. Everything has changed. The players have changed. Our attitude toward the players has changed. I know fans or former fans that are very angry about baseball, and they've given up on it, and they're very indignant. They say, baseball changed, baseball changed. And I sort of hold myself back from saying, well, in the past 40 years, everything in this country has changed. Every single thing in this country has changed. Our families, our politics, how we think about each other, how we look, how we talk. All that is gone. The cities have changed. Enormous changes have taken place, and yet people are indignant that baseball could somehow change. It's very interesting this should be the case because, of course, it's changed. It's changed a lot. It's going on. So I am often upset about some new thing that's coming along in baseball, but in the last 10 years, almost everything that Bud Selig has proposed, I've been dead against, and he's been absolutely right. It's been terrific. I'm thinking of the splitting up the leagues where we have interleague play, wild card teams. This has changed baseball a lot, and the postseason in baseball is one of the great sporting events in the world right now. It's just astounding. I don't need to tell you about this. So we'll get around to the dark parts later on, but this is about to be April, so I can't feel too bad about baseball.
Let me go to the far end, and Dan.
Well, I'm lucky to be in Boston because we really see baseball from a different standpoint than most of the rest of the country. And the level of interest is so high right now for this team. And I've only been following since '62, and it's higher than I've ever thought. And there's been years, when Jerry played in the late '70s, we thought it was as high as it could get. All the all-star teams and the close races with the Yanks they had. And this is this Red Sox-Yankee thing is the greatest story ever told. And we're right here at the epicenter of it now. I'm in a business in the last 3 or 4 years. There's been problems with people in our business who make things up. But I always say I don't have to make stuff up. I cover the Red Sox. I mean, you can't make up the stuff that happens around here. It's just you don't have to. And it's a real privilege to be in on that. And the Globe, we do a baseball section every year. A lot of stories on the same topic. We develop a theme. And I think this year's theme is a league of their own, which is what it feels like the Red Sox and Yankees are in now. Certainly financially, with the payrolls, they are in that. In terms of their own rivalry, they are in that. On the other hand, neither team has won a World Series in the last 3 years, and for the Sox, it stretches back a little further. And, having the top payroll doesn't guarantee that you're going to win the World Series. And we worry about the small markets. But we've seen Oakland compete in the last couple of years with teams that finished in first place. The California Angels, Anaheim Angels won the World Series a couple of years ago. The Twins have been in the playoffs. Florida, I don't think, had one of the top payrolls. Did they, Mr. Henry? Not sure. No, okay. So in any event, baseball is not as healthy as we'd like. It never is. But, again, I'm being selfish here. And just from where I'm sitting, it's never been better. I can't wait for the thing to get going. Sunday night in Baltimore, we'll be there. As we've already stated, the Sox could have a 2-game lead in the last column at that point. and bring it on. I think this is going to be the greatest summer we've ever had here. And after what we went through last summer, that's saying something. So I'm being selfish when I say everything is wonderful in baseball, but that's how it feels to me right now.
Let me turn next to Larry.
Charlie, I would offer one sort of cautionary note before I respond, and that is people have been predicting the demise of the game, the difficulties of the game, the problems would multiply over the years. This has been going on for some time. There's a great line by Sparky Anderson, who was a greater manager than he was a grammarian, but he said something like, we try everything we can to kill the game, but nothing nobody does never hurts it. And I think we've got to keep that in mind as we look at the state of the game these days, that there are problems, to be sure. There is by my lights, the obscenity of player salaries. There is the problem of competitive imbalance. There is the acrimonious relationship with the Players Association. There are lots of things that you can point to, but the essential appeal of the game remains the same. I agree with Dan that our perspective in Boston is different because of the love that's here and the history that's here and the heritage. John Henry and I joked at the time that the team was acquired that we should recognize that the tradition, the heritage of the Red Sox should be an asset on the balance sheet of the club. It was so important and so substantial. So the perspective is different from Boston than any other place. Still, there are problems in the game that we've got to be aware of, but the purity of the game, the dailiness of the game is one of its great appeals to me. The dailiness of the game will always be here. The fact that baseball is the ultimate city game, as far as I'm concerned, where there's a green place to play in the middle of the city, that charm is there. The competitiveness of the game is an enduring and appealing aspect of it. And then we all have our histories. Charlie, you said part of your love for the game goes back to playing it in your early years. Well, so many of us, particularly people of our age, played the game and thought of it as the essential sport of our time, although that's under some, I guess, review or dispute by some these days. But we have a history, and if you ask someone if they like baseball or if they're a baseball fan, more often than not, if you say the question, are you a baseball fan, the person will say, well, I grew up in X and I'm a Pirate fan, or I grew up in Chicago and I'm a Cub fan. There is something about our youth and the connection to the game that is undying. So you're right, there are problems. We could sit here and detail them for the fans at long length, but there are problems in every endeavor. There are problems in every walk of life. There are problems in every country and industry. So let's don't dwell on them. Roger's written beautifully about the game and speaks with some disappointment about how uninteresting the problems in the game are. That too often we focus on those things and labor issues and those kinds of things, and they just detract us from the charm of the game. The game has an essential charm, an essential daily competitiveness that appeals to all of us, and has a sense of history that's enormously important for many of us in our affection for the game.
Well, not to be a party pooper, but I will dwell on a couple of them in a few moments, but that is my role. But let me turn next to Jerry Remy, who gets to do something that he never did in his playing days, which is bat fourth.
Very good. Well, obviously, anybody that has listened to me for the last 17 years know that I absolutely love the game of baseball. I mean, I can't wait for Sunday night because, for me, I always say it's a soap opera. You know, we start on Sunday night, and as we all know, that a lot of things are going to happen in the course of a season. A lot of good things, a lot of bad things. And I totally enjoy that. I agree with Roger. I think the players of today are better than they were in the past. Yes, the game has problems. I don't have to deal with, obviously, the things that Larry and John Henry have to deal with as far as the finances of a ball club. It is different. Now that I'm not playing anymore, I'd love to see them go back to one-year contracts. I think they get much better performances out of certain people. But it has changed. You know, I mean, I recall coming to the major leagues as a minor leaguer and just in complete awe of playing against people that I watched on television and people that I admired going to these ballparks like Fenway Park and Tiger Stadium at that time and walking in and Yankee Stadium and saying, you know, Babe Ruth was actually in this batter's box. Lou Gehrig stood here. And this meant something to me. And sometimes I worry with today's players, not all of them, but some of them, that they take a lot of this for granted and are not familiar with the history of baseball. And that does bother me a little bit. And I think a lot of that comes, obviously, from money. I mean, I think money corrupts a lot of things and a lot of what the people do in the game. But the fact is, it's a beautiful game. And as Dan said, you know, and I've said this many times, I was born here. I grew up here as a Red Sox fan. I was fortunate to play here, and I'm very fortunate now to be part of the organization, bringing the games to the public. And this is I have never in my life seen the intensity of the fans, the interest in the fans as high as it is now. And I played in the late 70s on some very, very good teams, and Dan remembers those times. You know, we would go to the ballpark and it'd still be 17,000, 18,000 people there, you know, on a bad night. That's not going to happen anymore. This is like the old Bruins days. You got to be in somebody's will now to get a ticket. So, you know, we're very fortunate here to have open up a season with a club that we think is going to be excellent, with a great rivalry. And I just can't wait for Sunday because I absolutely love this game of baseball.
You do indeed apparently have to be in somebody's will or know a ticket broker to get a Red Sox ticket, but I won't bring that up there. Let me start with one of those problems, and I will hold these to 10-minute. I've got a stopwatch here. I'll hold these to 10-minute discussions. I'll pick out somebody to lead it off, and then you all jump in when you want. I'll cut it off at 10 minutes. We'll go on to another thing, then we'll get to your questions. But let me start with income disparity. The Yankees and the Brewers have such disequilibrium of revenue that the Yankees can buy 8 Jason Giambis and still have money left over, more than the Milwaukee Brewers do, which could, it seems to me, kill the sport when you have the large number of games that therefore become irrelevant in Milwaukee. Comments? Let me start with you, Dan.
Well, yeah, I hate these topics, and it's unfortunate. There's always been disparity in baseball. I mean, when I was a kid, the Senators were out of it opening day. We knew they weren't going to go anywhere. You just talked about them. They won opening day in '62, and it was the only game. There were teams like that then. There were teams like that now. Now it does seem more economics-driven. But again, we talked about earlier, Twins, A's, Marlins, it's possible. You need good management in addition to money. Having the money is not enough. So it can be done. I think it's deflating for places like Pittsburgh and Milwaukee to start off the year knowing they have no chance. But we've seen, like the Royals last year, it can happen. And I do feel for the fans in some of those markets that don't have what we have here.
There's an old baseball aphorism: the 3 things money can't buy: love, happiness, and the American League pennant. I'm not sure that's as true today as it used to be. The economic disparities are what's driving some of the imbalance. I agree with you that there has been imbalance in baseball for a long time, but it's not been imbalance that's been based on the revenue disparities of clubs. Charlie cited the Brewers and the Yankees. Well, the differential between the Brewers and the Expos, for example, is even greater, although they're in different countries and different leagues, but you still have one team with local revenues that are astronomical in the $250 to $300 million range for one, and the $20 to $25 million range for the other. I mean, that's a 10-to-1 disparity.
There was an attempt to address this with the tax, with the payroll tax, to try to bring some equality between payrolls on teams. There's not been a payroll cap in baseball yet, but there's been an attempt at this. But as long as you have local revenues that you get from NESN and the Yankees get from the Yes Network, and the small amounts that clubs like the Expos or what Seattle or Milwaukee get from their local contracts, isn't this going to last in perpetuity?
I don't think it has to. I think that there are ways to address it. And baseball has already begun the task of addressing it with the more substantial revenue sharing provisions that have been adopted in the last decade. And that's it's substantial. The changes are substantial. The amount of money being transferred is substantial. But you still have the problems of gigantic markets. New York is the largest sports market in the Western world, in the entire world, and so there are going to be certain disparities that are going to be hard to correct. We're not looking to create a field of complete equality or parity. What you're trying to do is create a zone where teams can reasonably compete with each other. It seems to me that's the goal, and revenue sharing is one element of that, but it's something we've got to be careful of because it doesn't directly address the issue of payroll disparity. There's a way to address that, Charlie, and that's to create a payroll zone, which is one of the things that was under consideration, although it was considered to be politically unacceptable. You have a minimum payroll that's required of a team. You have a maximum payroll that's permitted for a team, and teams have to operate within that payroll zone. And it seems to me that sooner or later, every sport is likely to have something like a payroll cap or a payroll zone.
Would you favor it, Roger?
I'm not sure that this disparity is really going to be cleared up. I think there are other means of doing it as well. I think that a much wider and more various free agent draft with lesser teams getting more than one pick and not losing their option, not losing their pick if they're not able to afford the players they pick. A few things like this. The same could apply to an international draft. But this disparity has gone on for a long time, and I think it's deeper than any of you remember. The Yankees, but in the 1930s and 40s and 50s, constantly played the three teams nearest to them, the second and third teams, the fourth team even, and totally beat up on the fourth, fifth, and the fifth, sixth, and seventh and eighth players, the bottom of the league. In those 30 years, the Yankees were in the World Series 18 times and won 15 times, which has not been approached and will not be approached by what's going on right now. I looked up the margin between the Yankees and those bottom four clubs, which were almost always the White Sox and the Senators and the Browns and the A's, and counting each of those, how they played against each of those teams over a period of 30 years. That's 120 series they played against them. The Yankees won 112 of those series. They tied 4 and they lost 4. I think I'm right in remembering those figures. So it's far more of an imbalance in those days. And the lesser teams, just one more thing, Larry, the lesser teams, you may remember, you maybe aren't quite there yet, but those bottom teams would make their budget every year on the Yankees coming to town for 2 or 3 weekends and filling the place up. And that's the way baseball operated.
I agree completely. There have been periods of real disparity in baseball, but it's not been based on economics. It's not been based, even in the years that you cite, the teams, the team payrolls were relatively close to each other. Yeah. And it's really been, since free agency and more importantly, I think, since the growth of cable television and the information revolution, that the disparity between markets has become more pronounced, and the disparities now are more related to finance than they were in the 30s and 40s, when they more related to expertise, I would say.
Jerry?
Well, quite frankly, we have a friend down in the South, the boss, who just has no regard for any luxury tax or anything. But the bottom line is, I think we made better moves than he made in the off season. And that's why I pick our club first. So, you can spend, I don't care how much money you spend, you have to have the people out there to execute a plan and to get the proper people in place. And I just think that the Red Sox did a better job of that. Now, the Red Sox also have a very large salary, too. But, when you look at some of these other clubs that Dan was mentioning, the teams that have won the championships over the last couple of years, you have to really look, I think, to the core of baseball, and that's the scouting, and that's the player development, and the people you have in the minor leagues who can nurture this talent that you have and bring it to the big leagues. And then, for a short period of time, maybe only 4 or 5 years, you have a chance to win something very similar like Oakland has done. But as time comes, they're going to lose those players.
But you can't sustain it.
No, you can't.
You take a look at Florida. Twice in 7 years has won the championship, and in the succeeding years has broken up the ball club.
They haven't done it this time. This time it looks they still got a pretty good ball club down there. They've got some very good young pitchers. But again, where are those young pitchers going to be in 3 or 4 years? They're going to be out in the market. And one of the big, money teams is probably going to be trying to sign these guys. So, I don't have the background that these guys have in the finances of the game. But I particularly enjoy to see some of these, like last year, Kansas City, for example, make a nice run at what they did. And I think that's special for the people in those parts of the countries that, if they can get a team that's young and exciting, successful, they can catch interest for a couple of years. Personally, I'd rather be here. I'd rather be in the big money market. It's just a lot more fun.
I covered John Connolly when he ran for president. He said, "I've been rich and I've been poor, and rich is better." I think that's what you're saying. Let me move on to the next one. Proposition number 2, this comes from me. Baseball has got to do something about steroids, but won't. And that threatens the fans' belief in the integrity of the game. Jerry?
Well, I think more than any other sport, and I'll use football for an example, I think this has kind of snuck up on baseball. Roger, for many years, when I started playing, and that was, of course, many years ago, but the fact is, weightlifting and things like that were not even part of your program. Flexibility. The game has totally changed. And I think the changes that have come along in this game have come along very quickly. And I think baseball obviously has to address those things, and they have to address it almost on the fly. You look at football for many years, and, big, strong, that's the nature of the game. Baseball was not like that. I can give you a story that my second year in the major leagues, at that time I weighed 160 pounds, and I stole, I think, 40 bases that year, and I got a lecture at the end of the season from my general manager that I better lose weight.
This is steroids?
Yeah. So I mean, that's how times have changed. The base stealing part of it, the moving runners over, the squeeze play, the hitter. It's now a very offensive game, and especially in the American League. So that has changed very much, and it is a problem, and it's going to be a major problem, a major issue. The one thing that I see, though, that the Players Association has a crack in it. As long as I've been involved in the Players Association, I was in the exception, really, with Marvin Miller, way at the beginning. Never would a player speak out against the union. Players are already speaking out on this subject, and if they are, then something serious is going to get done about it, and it should be done because it's wrong.
Roger, do you think that that's possible, that you can break the union stranglehold on this issue?
I don't know what's going to happen. I don't think any of us knows what's going to happen. I think that there's a general sense everywhere that this needs to be looked at right away. It has come up very quickly, and fans are overreacting. They believe that all the records have to be thrown out now, which isn't true, and that a lot of the changes the physical changes that you see in ball players have not come from steroids, and a lot of the modern hitting is not from steroids. It's from smaller strike zone. It's from the way not being able to pitch inside, much smaller ballparks. All this is involved. My own guess, I think that somehow the Players Association and the owners will come together on this. I think it's been proposed it might be possible to let the Players Association run the testing, let them hire a first-class testing group, and let them basically do it and do an agreed-upon new range of penalties. This would take care of the privacy issue that is so much on Don Fear's mind. But as I say, I don't know. I don't think the Congress is going to be able to do anything. They talk this way, but I can't imagine how they're going to step in. And I don't know whether we're ever going to find out which of the records that we're thinking about were directly attributable to steroids.
Larry, to the extent you can comment on it.
Well, I'm not quite as pessimistic as your proposition would suggest. I think that things are going to be done about it. I think it's a recognized problem, and that the public recognizes it. Certainly the clubs recognize it. Many players recognize it, and I think the Players Association is beginning to recognize how pervasive the problem is, and I think that's the first step towards improving it and dealing with it. The commissioner has said he looks forward to the day when we have a zero tolerance in baseball for this, and we test regularly for it, and I think that will happen. It just won't happen. It's as inevitable as tomorrow, just not so imminent. It's not going to happen tomorrow, but it's going to happen. And I think the clubs have taken a step forward with the Players Association to provide for testing last year for the first time that triggered the new testing program for this year. And the clubs and the Players Association are about to make another step forward with the World Cup of Baseball, which will require more stringent steroid testing than is even the case within Major League Baseball. So I think that we're on a journey that will take some time, but I do think that I do hold out some serious hope that people of goodwill can resolve this issue.
And I'm curious to the extent that it's discussed in the clubhouse.
I really wouldn't know. They certainly wouldn't share that with me, and I couldn't even dare to guess on that. I think probably a lot. That's just a guess.
When you bring it up with them?
I have not been down there to do that, no. It was the big furor over it was while I was up here. Although I am hoping that Kurt Schilling can be in charge of the testing if they're going to have the player, as Roger suggested. And I also hope that what Larry says is true, and I have my doubts just about any kind of quickness to that. I know you said long term, and the intransigence of the Players Association, I know. And Larry knows it better than any of us here. And you've got a couple guys there that are going to use the Constitution. This is McCarthyism to them, you know. And they're going to use the U.S. Constitution, which weighs in their favor. They're going to use the Basic Agreement, which weighs in their favor. And they're going to use the silence of the lambs, which is a constituency of players that won't come out against this. And they say, we have a vote, and it's 900 to nothing. You know, what can we say? Our guys like the way we're doing it.
But that's what
Every vote's 900 to nothing.
But that's what I thought Jerry and Roger were indicating might indeed crack.
It's very slow. I mean, Turk Wendell says something, and Barry Bonds challenges him to a fight. You know, it's like, you know, you don't have much cracking. And publicly, you have very little cracking. And this union has served them very well. It's a bad word. This Players Association has served them very well. And they're not going to fly in the face of it. If I were a player, it's easy for me to say I'm not. And people, you know, I look like some of these guys, and people thought I was on the juice, I'd be screaming, test me. I don't like this. I want to clear my name. I won't do it.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
That's the point, I think, among the players. Certainly, the great majority are not using steroids, and they're the ones who want to be tested, want testing to go on. And the other issue I keep hearing about is the fact that minor leaguers trying to make it up to the majors, who are not on the 40-man roster, are subjected to the minor league testing, which is far more severe, and are tested much more, and penalties are very strong and immediate. And they have to compete with major leaguers, 40-man roster members who were tested hardly at all. And this, I think even the players understand, is not a viable situation. There's a very interesting piece this week in ESPN, the magazine, written by the great Buster Olney, formerly of the Times, who has an anonymous major leaguer talking
That's what I hated about that piece, is that the guy won't use his name.
I know who he is. I figured him out.
Oh, good.
You know.
Go ahead.
No.
I mean, if the guy would use his name, I'd have a lot more respect for the piece. It's easy to go off when no one knows who you are.
But for those of us who haven't read it, you should say what.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Well, I mean, he's an older player, and he's not saying that he is using it, but he is tempted to use it. He has a couple of years to go in his career, and if it's not long enough to really damage his health, he talks about the health issue. He talks about the issue I've mentioned about the younger players, and said there's a lot of conversation about this. He said he's not jealous of any particular player. He's just thinking about his own career, and he thinks about the medical drawbacks to this.
Jerry, final word?
Yeah, could I add one thing? You know, I don't know what the percentage of players are, and yes, it is a major topic down in spring training. There's no question about that. Fear was down there the other day, and he had a meeting with 2.5 hours, and I would guess 2 hours was probably on the steroid issue. Players are talking about it. But I'd like to also say that the players of today take much better care of themselves than we did. There's no question about that. I mean, I see it day in and day out. I see players after games in the weight room. I see players there 2 hours after games. This was non-existent in my day. And this is not that long ago. But they are more conscious of being in good shape year-round. The majority of players know the type of money they can make in the game today with longevity. They take better care of themselves. I mean, crying out loud, after a game, you could go into a bar. Dan, you travel with us. You'd have, you'd find 10, half the team in a bar after a game. You don't see that anymore. That surprises you, Roger. You don't see that anymore.
The manager would be there first.
Exactly. And some managers just wanted it for themselves. They wouldn't let the players in. So, but I am of the belief that today's ball player takes much, much better care of himself than in the past, because they know what's out there for him. Now, with this issue, I don't know what the percentage is, but I believe it has to be cleaned up and cleaned up quickly.
Proposition number 3. Pedro should have been pulled. Larry?
Yeah.
I'm not sure I get the reference. Oh, that was so long ago, Charlie. Yeah.
Are you kidding me? I still see the ball go through Bill Buckner's leg.
Yeah, they're... Well, let's see. That is I know that in retrospect, there's been this mountain of evidence. Everyone convinced that the decision he made was the wrong one, and it proved to be the wrong one. But there is something to be said for a manager relying on his star. I understand that, but there's something to be criticized for if a manager does not know enough about his star's stamina at that time. I mean, Pedro did take him. Pedro was out of the game. Pedro was back in the clubhouse, and was thought his night was over, and then was asked to come back and continue. So this is a topic that people are going to debate for years to come. But my sense is, obviously, as a result of what happened, Grady did not make the right call. But his reliance on his star, on his alpha male, the guy who really wanted the ball and was not frightened of anything, is not an unreasonable and not an irrational position.
Jerry?
He didn't want the ball. He was done. I mean, it was clearly the wrong decision to make in my mind, especially at a time when the bullpen was pitching the best it had pitched all season long. It had really carried him through the playoffs. Pedro, all season long, was a 7-inning guy. And you could tell when Pedro walked off the mound, he was hugging, he was, getting handshakes. And in Pedro's mind, that was the end. Okay, so, when he goes back out there, he's not the same guy that left in the 6th inning or the 7th inning. He's not the same guy because mentally he's out of it. So, this is not the day where you'd have to pull a ball out of the starter's hand to get him out of the game. You couldn't get Louis Tiant out of a 9-inning game. He wanted to finish it. You couldn't get, Nolan Ryan out of a 9-inning game. He wanted to finish it. We're in different times. Pedro was done.
I'm curious at something that you've both alluded to in that reference to the fact that he thought he was done, which is the mental effect on pitchers as opposed to the pure physical exhaustion that may exist. When you think you're done, that is some kind of a sea change in the way you handle yourself on the mound?
I think so. I really do. I mean, and especially the way his season had gone, and it's gone for the last couple of years. I mean, this guy right now, and I've always said it's the best pitcher I've ever seen in a Red Sox uniform, but he is a 7-inning pitcher right now.
Is it then the manager's responsibility to say to him, 5th inning, you may have to go 8 tonight?
Pedro, I'm sure, had no intentions of going 8 innings in that game. I really don't. And especially the way, I don't know, Dan, if you agree, but the way the bullpen was going. I mean, the bullpen, for the first time all year, everything was clicking. Everything was falling into place at the right time. The Red Sox had a better team than the Yankees had last year. The Red Sox should have been in the World Series. Okay, that's exactly the way I felt. And one dumb move kept them from doing that, and they took care of the problem.
Yeah. And it's not a second guess when this is a first guess. I mean, when he came out for the inning, I can tell you in the press box, people were like throwing their hands up, what is going on here? And it was not like we waited until we saw what happened. I mean, everyone knew, and I know these guys can't admit it, but I'm sure where Larry was sitting it was the same reaction. And then when he goes out after the second hit and it leaves him in again, this is not second guessing. I had a guy walk up to me before he threw the first pitch of the inning and say, they should fire the manager now, just that he's out there. I mean, because this was so apparent to everyone that he was done, it was over. And it's, I don't know what explains it, a brain lock or just being afraid to go to the bullpen or losing with guys that aren't as famous as Pedro or what it was. It was a bad idea from start to finish.
It's fear. It's fear in a manager's mind, a man that didn't have the courage, in my opinion, to make the proper decision. And if you're going to start, wondering how your ace is going to feel, who cares how he's going to feel?
Right. Right. Well, the fortunate part of it all is that we've all forgotten about it. We'll never bring it up again. It's just buried, you know.
Roger, you should weigh in.
Well, I was going to talk about this game, but I was afraid to bring the subject up. But now that it's here, you also have to be aware of the reaction of Red Sox fans. I hear it a lot from Red Sox fans, I really do, and from friends of mine who are Red Sox fans, who every one of them told me what happened when Grady left him in. They went out for walks, they fell inert on the floor, they screamed, they threw glasses. They knew he was done. Everybody knew but Grady Little. But I'm going to take a little moment here and talk about how strange baseball is, because things always happen that you'd never expect. I wrote about that game and that series, and about 2 weeks afterwards, late in November, I got a letter from a fan in New York named Rick Peterson, not the Mets pitching coach, another Rick Peterson, who told me he'd been sitting in left field, deep left field in Yankee Stadium that night. And when Kevin Millar hit a solo home run out there in the fourth inning, the ball came flying out to where he was, and it was caught by the guy right across the aisle from him. And he almost caught it, but the guy across the aisle caught it and threw it back on the field. It was a Yankee fan. And he started talking to him. This guy's name, he said, was Judd Rothstein, was a student at Columbia. The man next to him was his father, a professor at Columbia. And Rick Peterson has a graduate degree from Columbia, so they established a connection there. Rick Peterson's wife was with him, a real Yankee fan, and she left after the seventh inning because she knew that they couldn't win as long as she was there. And so she missed the fatal move or non-move in the eighth and the tying rally. But he said in the 11th inning, he said several things happened. This letter goes on. He said, Aaron Boone swung the ball and hit it, and I knew three things right away. The Yankees would win, the Red Sox would lose again, and this ball was coming directly to me, into my hands. And the ball flew out there, and it was touched by Judd Rothstein, the guy who caught the Kevin Millar ball. He touched the second home run, and this guy, Rick Peterson, caught it and doubled over, and he remembered what had happened to the guy in Chicago, and held on to the ball, and the game was over. And he said he was arranging a reunion with Judd Rothstein so he could come and visit the ball. That's almost the end of the story, but I brought this letter home from my office, and I was sitting at home reading it, and I look at the address, and Rick Peterson lives at 1328 Madison Avenue. I live at 1261 Madison Avenue, which meant that at that moment, the ball was closer to me than it was when it landed in left field and I was in the auxiliary press box at Yankee Stadium. Only in baseball.
And Charlie, before we let go of this topic, now that we're into it, I love these kind of stories. Just one last thing on this topic of leaving Pedro in the game. How obvious this was. A friend of mine whose brother's in the audience tonight told me that she was in a Chinese restaurant in Hingham, and none of the waiters speak English or know anything about baseball. They were standing looking at the TV with their trays going, "No Pedro, no Pedro." It was like, you know.
Right.
And proposition number 4. I should do an A-Rod proposition, shouldn't I? But I suspect it'll come up in the questions. Proposition number 4. For all of the problems of baseball, God has to have had a hand in inventing this game. For no mere mortal could conceive of all the delicious anticipation produced by the World Series in recent years and by last year's playoffs. The game, for all of its problems, triumphs over all. Roger?
Well, yeah, sure, I agree. I mean, I've been doing this for 40 years, and there's something that kept keeping me going at it. One of the things that you notice about baseball is that old ball players and old baseball executives always talk about things in the distant past in the present tense. This is really true. I'm leading off third base. So-and-so's on first base. Joe throws the ball. And this is not accidental, because there's something about baseball, the way the field is constructed and the way we look at it, that freezes time, and things can happen. Very complicated things can happen, and you see it in a way you haven't seen things before. instant replay is almost taking this away, but not really. Not if you're sitting in the stands and something happens. And
we have to have instant replay.
I know it. But I said when I come out of the press box and I sit in the stands, we don't watch the way we used to because I watch a play and then I go like this, looking to see what it was. I saw a play in 1982, which is fairly complicated. Maybe it's this time. We'll come back to it later. It's a great story. It's a slightly complicated play. But I discussed this play with the umpire. I called him up, Paul Runge. 20 years later, I didn't know Paul Runge. I wanted to confirm this is the weirdest play I ever saw. It could have been a triple play on an appeal. If you want to hear it, I'll tell you. It didn't take that long. But I called Paul Runge up. I didn't know him. I was putting my last book together, and I wanted to be sure I'd had this right. And I finally got his number from the Katie Feeney, and I got him out in California, and I called him and introduced myself. And I said, this is in Atlanta, July 27th, 1982, and I described the situation, and he didn't say anything. And I said, and Bob Horner comes sliding by home plate. He said, I don't remember. And I said, he comes sliding by home plate, and then the ball gets thrown to first base. And he said, yes, he's sliding by home plate. He misses it by 2 feet. He's on this side. He was back at that moment. And think of the thousands and thousands and thousands of plays that Paul Runge saw, and yet that moment is preserved for him. That's one of the appeals of this game.
Larry?
The charm of it has, to me, something to do with its utter unpredictability, which is something I would remind and do remind Red Sox fans this year of that basic fact. That it is, you do go to the game and see something different. You know the cliche, you see something every night that you haven't seen before. There's an unpredictability to the game that's part of its charm. There's a randomness to the game, which is, I guess, related to the unpredictability of it. But the field is so large, the ball is so small, strange, unusual, bizarre things happen that are simply random. And that also allows for a kind of continuing interest in the game. It's not as though things happen that you have seen over and over and over. There are new things that always happen. And thirdly, the game has a kind of appeal that's not unlike the appeal that wine has for people who love wine. And my beautiful wife is here today, and she should relate to this. There are issues that you can enjoy about wine that you can just enjoy if you like red, white, and rosé. And then there are issues about wine that you can enjoy if you know something about countries and vineyards, and all of a sudden then it's years and rainfall and all of that. The game of baseball is like that. It can be enjoyed on so many different levels, and it doesn't matter in some ways what level you're really on. There are things to be enjoyed at every level, and if you truly love it, you can find more ways to get more deeply into the lower reaches of the game, the more inside parts of the game. And I think it's a continuing education for all of us who are fortunate enough to work in it and to see as many games as we do.
Dan?
I think for me, it's baseball's more than the other games. It's very personal. I think the relationship that you have with the game. And I think for me and for most of us probably in this room, that goes back to some sort of a connection that you have with your parents in most cases. That's what introduces you to the game. And I think the game in later years reminds you of something about your family, your parents. And then if you're lucky, you get to turn that around and give it to your children. And that kind of connection through your family is what's made it most special for me. The last time I saw my father alive was in Fenway Park in 1979. It was just a coincidence, but he was the first guy to take me there. I have that. I met my wife in a hotel bar with Earl Weaver, so there's that. And
very personal.
And my lovely daughter Kate, who just walked in here a little while ago, is a softball player and has always loved baseball, as do my other children. And Kate was ill 10 years ago, and Ted Williams became her friend because he had a soft spot for all sick children. And so she got to hang out and know Ted Williams at the end of his life, and when he was still doing okay. So just those kind of things. It's very dear to me and very personal and very special with the connections to the family.
I think that's a good point. The wine analogy is an interesting one because at whatever level you appreciate wine, you savor it. And there's something about the pace of baseball You were arguing about what is the national sport. Some people who love football say it's now the national pastime. It will never be the national pastime. It may eclipse baseball in popularity, but you don't pass time watching football, and that's what you do in baseball. I remember we were talking upstairs about the new Comiskey Park. The first game my dad ever took me to was at Comiskey Park, and I can tell you which seats we sat in. When I did a piece just before they tore down the old Comiskey, I went and found the seats that we sat in and watched Billy Pierce pitch for the Chicago White Sox. And it has to do with that. You don't ever block your father or tackle your father, but you do go out and play catch with him. And that enduring connection that you have, father to son, generation after generation, is so important. Jerry?
Well, I agree completely. For baseball, for me, was watching my grandfather sit in a little patio with his cigar going and the radio on. And every time there was a walk, it would just absolutely drive him crazy. He hated pitchers who walked people, and that hasn't changed in the game of baseball. But we would sit there, and he and my dad would bring me up to Fenway probably, if we were lucky, twice a year. In those days, you could walk up, you could buy a box seat, and watch a doubleheader on a Sunday afternoon.
Well, those were the days.
And I'll never forget the feeling of the first time that I walked into Fenway Park. When I walked up the ramp, and at that time we didn't have color television, we had black and white. And the first thing that struck me was obviously the green on the monster, the green of the beautiful playing field, and the red, white, and blue socks at that time the Red Sox wore. We didn't see that on TV. And I was just completely in awe. I mean, I was just a baseball fan immediately. 1967, one of the greatest years the Red Sox ever had, really made me a total Red Sox fan. And you know, those kind of things, going into my grandfather's backyard and hitting up against his house a wiffle ball and making believe that was hitting off the left field wall. That to me is what I'm so pleased with now is that when I walk out of the ballpark at night to my car after a game, I'm seeing the same thing. I'm seeing these kids. I think for a while we started to lose some of the kids in the game of baseball. I really do. And right here in Boston. But I think that's changed. I see the kids with their dads. I see the kids with their grandfathers. I hear them talking about the game. I hear them talking about, I got close to to Ramirez and we were sitting in left field and he smiled at us. I mean, I hear those things, and that makes me feel good because it's in great shape. The kids are still learning it. They want to play it when they grow up. And look, we all at some point played the game of baseball, and I think that's what makes it different than a lot of sports. We all seem to play some Little League baseball or some high school baseball. We all think we know the game. And, you know, I think that makes it special.
I add one more thing, Charlie? Sure. I learned baseball from my father, too, who actually, when he grew up in Cleveland, his hero was Cy Young, so it takes us back a ways. But before we get too sweet about this, I had a friend in San Francisco who made up one of the great all-star teams of all time, which is all-stars made up of great players who never threw the ball around in the old backyard with their old man. And if you think about it, that's quite a lineup. This includes Ty Cobb, Joe DiMaggio, Ted Williams. So there's always something different. Thank you.
Well, and to pull back from the sweetness a little bit, Jerry cites Manny Ramirez smiling at a friend of his. I got Bert Blyleven to give me the finger once.
I can top that.
I don't think we're going to find out the answer to that or the person that Roger was citing a moment ago in the article if we go all night. But we do have time for questions. And I would urge any of you who have a question to stand up. And as you're coming up, I would throw you a question. Come on up, and then we'll get to you. But go ahead and line up, and then I'll start calling for people for questions. Your favorite ballpark in Major League Baseball? Can't pick Fenway.
Pac-Bell.
San Francisco?
Yeah, I think Fenway is clearly the most beloved ballpark in baseball, so you've made it harder. But I like Camden Yards for obvious reasons. And the new ballpark in San Diego is going to be a ballpark like no other as well.
Did you name one that you didn't build?
Forbes Field. Forbes Field. Forbes Field.
Jerry?
I like Camden Yards. That's my favorite. And as far as playing, I enjoy playing in Yankee Stadium the most because of the excitement.
Roger?
I'll go with Dan. I think Pac Bell is a great, great ballpark. It's just terrific. And if you haven't seen it, go when you're in San Francisco, make a point of going. It's right by the bay. And if you have really good seats down low, you can't see the bay, but you're aware of it right out there. And the upper seats, you get the baseball right down here, the entire sweep of it's beautifully built. It's right downtown. It's the greatest modern ballpark, I think.
All right, let me start here at this microphone.
This is an unusual thing to say in public, but I'm concerned that Red Sox fans are obsessed with losing. And I understand the history and why that's so, but it's really kind of sad. We had a most incredible season last year. And since I've lived in Boston, again, since the early 70s, I've had amazing teams year after year. We've not won the World Series, but people wind up forgetting, as I think, Larry, you were talking about the charm and the beauty and the excitement of baseball, and all we do is complain about last year's loss. There's a sad and unfortunate ending, but it was a fabulous year, and people forget that.
Amen. Amen.
Of course, as somebody who lives in New York, I would comment that winning is not all that great, you know. I mean, the pressure just builds to do it again and again and again. And also, somebody who lives in New York, I must say, and I'd be interested in a comment from all of you about this, and as well as a comment of the gentleman's question, this is sort of delicious. You know, this guy has now got $190 million. He's got an all-star at every position with the possible exception of second base. And if he loses, it's going to drive him crazy.
What's new?
I think that the Red Sox this year have built a team that's designed to go into the World Series and into the postseason and through the postseason. I think the Yankees team, if you look at it carefully, is designed to go through the season, but is not equipped as it now stands to play in the postseason. They've given up 3 starters with a total of 31 postseason wins between them, and you don't get that back. I think
That's interesting. You think it's their pitching that is suspect come playoffs?
Well, you don't. They've given up such experience pitching. They have some new pitchers who have not pitched in the postseason, which is an entirely different proposition. I think that what the gentleman said before about being preoccupied with losing and winning is certainly very strong up here. And I've thought of a plan for every one of you here. If you're all Red Sox, I was thinking about this on the way up here today. Here's how to feel better about this season. Every one of you find another Red Sox fan and make this bet. Give them, for money, give them the Yankees and the Red Sox, and you take the rest of the teams and for who's going to win the World Series. It's probable that you're going to win some money, so you'll feel better when the terrible when the terrible fate comes along once again, which may not happen. It may not happen this year. If you win, you won't mind losing the money. If you lose the bet, you won't mind losing it at all. So this is an insurance policy I recommend.
Could I address that
Please,
last
Jerry.
question? The first year that I played in Boston was in 1978. I'd come from a very bad team in California. And I was also on a group of a team with a lot of all-stars at almost every position. In that particular year, we won 99 games, and we lost a playoff game to the Yankees. The Yankees went on to win the World Series. We felt had we won that game, we'd have done the same thing. We were called bums, chokers, because we had a huge lead at the All-Star break. This is totally different times. Last year was a horrible loss. But I've never seen, again, it's a totally different feeling than it was back in 78. We were almost embarrassed to go back to spring training. Red Sox were never off the front page all winter long, and it's all very positive. It's a different group. It's a different time. It's a different group of fans. It's much nicer this way.
Let me just, because there's a bunch that we want, your number of people at the microphone, so let me ask you to make it a pretty quick question, and let me get to this young man here.
Jerry, did you like playing baseball better, or do you like announcing it better?
You know, I'm going to tell you the truth. When I finished playing, I honestly didn't think that I would find something that would give me the satisfaction of playing. You know, every day the highs and lows of the game, and it's everything I did since I was just a little kid. And you know, when I was finished playing, I was empty. I didn't know what I was going to do, and I didn't think I could find anything in my life that was going to fulfill that. I did, and by a complete coincidence, I have found a job that I absolutely, truly love. And I've been doing it now for 17 years because it keeps me in the game of baseball, around the people I enjoy being around. I enjoy the fact that even though I don't enjoy public speaking, I can speak in the television and people like to listen to that. I'm amazed by that, you know. and so, yes, this has given me a lot of the same challenge that I did as a baseball player without the headaches.
Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Stephen Good, and I'm a history teacher here in Boston. But I'm not a Boston Red Sox fan. But I enjoy great baseball, and I think they have a great team.
You had people with you for a minute there.
Yeah.
I'm good at this. I'll get them back. My question, I heard just about every panelist speak of the salaries. If you are not going to pay the players the salaries, what are you going to do with the money? Take your prices lower?
Larry?
Well, by my lights, again, you're getting my subjective point of view. One reason the prices are at the level that they are currently occupying is because the growth of salaries over the last 10, 15, 20 years has been just exponential. And if we're not careful, we're careening towards the $26 hot dog and the $45 close to that now, the $45 parking space. And so I do think that it is hard to unwind the system, but and I don't expect that we're going to go back to a system with much lower salaries, but limiting the rate of growth to some degree would probably be a good thing for the game and for the prices that fans have to pay, because it is the fans who do pay for the hot dogs, for the parking, for the tickets, that do pay these salaries. So if you'd like to restrain the rate of growth, it seems to me some modest system that would allow for some kind of limitation on the growth of salaries would be appropriate, and it would have the extra benefit of allowing for some kind of competitive balance.
Over here. Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. Young man, I'm sorry.
What would happen if Pedro and Zimmer met again?
Dan?
What did he say?
It actually could happen because Zim's back in uniform with Tampa Bay. He's going to work a lot of their games. So when the Sox go down there, that could happen. I mean, Don Zimmer was embarrassed by that. You won't see him doing that again. And you know what, Pedro, I've been critical of Pedro about certain things, but that is not an area where I would choose to criticize him. I don't think he did a thing wrong in that particular incident where the man is running at him. I thought he tried to step back and just shoot him away. He had little choice but to at least put his hands out to defend himself. The pictures looked very bad, like he threw an old man to the ground, but that's not a thing where I don't think he had much option. And there were other things that day that I thought he performed very poorly about, but not that.
Charlie, my favorite Christmas card this year came from a fan, and it was a picture of Pedro pushing Zimmer to the ground, and it was captioned, "Peace on Earth."
Right here.
This is to Larry. Larry, I've been reading, and I was wondering if the antitrust exemption was removed totally, and whereby teams could move to any cities that they wanted to move to. Wouldn't that, like, for example, you could have 3 or 4 teams in New York City, wouldn't that, in fact, help to even out the playing field? Because right now, in New York City, you only have 2 teams, and it's almost like, I tell my friends, it's like Donald Trump in New York City. He's only got 1 real estate rival. He'd be making even more money. Isn't there a problem when you only have like 1 or 2 teams in major markets when you could have 3 or 4?
I second that motion. I think it's a very astute point that this market is so great that at one time, as everyone here remembers, it was shared by 3 teams. And I think, were if I had anything to do with it, I think I would recognize that the next very good market is northern New Jersey, and that is a market where a team could probably succeed and prosper. And I know that there are teams in New York that might not like that, but the simple fact is they've got the largest market in the world, and and a third team there would probably help balance that out. But that is the issue of antitrust is probably not going to come into play with respect to this. There's a vote of the clubs that allow teams to move to different markets, and as I remember, it's a 3/4 vote. So teams can move to different markets if they get a 3/4 vote, and we will see what happens in the years ahead. But there's going to be some realignment of teams.
Would a third team be just as evil?
Impossible.
Larry, when we had 3 teams, Boston had 2 teams.
That's true. That is true. But our market is still is large compared to many. But this whole notion that somehow we're equal to the Yankees in market size is just wrong-headed. It's not 2 superpowers going at it with 28 other clubs. It's really one really superpower in terms of its market size and its media market going up against the other 29.
Yes, sir.
Great forum. Mr. Angell, I love the story about the 7th inning. My 7th inning moment was during the 6th game during 1986 when Mookie Wilson's brother turned to me and said, "Congratulations on winning the World Series." The rest of the evening we didn't go that well. But earlier in the forum, you, Dan and Jerry, were talking about the fear that Brady showed in the 7th game last year. The week or so after where that really came through to me, and the adjective fear didn't creep in until tonight to adequately describe it, was something that didn't get that much play, was him talking about the players, some players actually talking to him about Bill Buckner and the curse of the Red Sox. And he said, I can see it in all of their eyes. I wanted to know why that didn't get played more, because in my mind, he was calling his team quitters at that point. Thank you.
He was seeing in his own mind. If he brought that up, talking about the fear of Bill Buckner, he was not only he was worried about himself, is what he was worried about, in my opinion. You know, look, anybody that plays in a city like this and in New York, and especially here because of the history, you are, as a player, let's face it, we don't go out there every day and expect the best things to happen. You don't want to be the guy who's going to be talked about 50 years from now. I mean, that's just, players feel that way. But for a manager to come out then and said, I had players, a lot of these guys don't even know who Bill Buckner is. Okay, that's the truth. You think Manny knows who Bill Buckner is?
Yeah.
I thought Manny was going to show up in spring training in Texas. And I like Manny.
Thank you. As a lifelong Red Sox fan, it's hard to separate the team from their home. Mr. Remy, you had the privilege to play there, and Mr. Shaughnessy, you've closed a book with the phrase, "Save Fenway." Mr. Angell, you've written eloquently about baseball, though less eloquently about Fenway. And Mr. Lucchino,
this is coming to you, Larry.
you get a hand in the decision about the fate of our ballpark, and you and Mr. Henry, of course, and you've done such wonderful things with the improvements, which we won't call renovations, but we're hoping that you will soon, any of you, speak on behalf of the ballpark. And you've got a wonderful combination now of the history that we've heard about tonight and the success of the changes that you've brought to the ballpark in the last 2 years, and we're hoping that soon we can have a decision on the fate of Fenway Park.
Let me go to your question then.
Thank you. Yes, well, I'd like to know about Fenway and whether or not we'll be able to enjoy it for a while.
We were the only group attempting to acquire the team that made a campaign pledge to preserve Fenway, and we're still living by that pledge. We've made a set of improvements. Thank you. We've made a set of improvements in each of the 3 years that we have been here. This third season coming up in the next few weeks, you'll see a set of improvements at Fenway, and our commitment is to continue that process. But at some point, we will have to sit down and do a cost-benefit analysis to make a final determination if that campaign promise can be kept, and it is our firm intention to keep it. But you're right, a final decision has not been announced. But look at what we do as much as what we say.
Thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am.
I know time is running out, so I'll try to be quick. Okay, 10 seconds before I do my question, I just want to reinforce what the young woman said who was the first to speak, because that was what originally brought me to my feet, was thinking about the connections between mothers and daughters and grandmothers, and it wasn't just for the boys. In many generations. My mother was my baseball teacher. Now, my question quickly is, what is it going to do to the psyche of Boston when we win?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a popular topic out there, and Bill Littlefield addressed that in the Sunday Globe magazine, and I've certainly addressed it. We all have. I don't think there's a person in the room or in New England who would say they don't want them to win because they're afraid they'll lose their mystique or something like that. It will be different, but I think everyone wants to feel that and then move on from there. I really don't think there's any school out there that wants to see this thing keep going. So it'll be different, but I think we can handle it.
In years past, you had players that would play their entire career with one team. And it seems as if recently, in the last decade or so, even more than that, that the respect for players and the loyalty of players is simply their bottom line, whether or not they're getting the contract that they think that they deserve. And even owners move from team to team. It seems as if the only loyal people are the fans to the team. So I was actually just wanted to get the panel's opinion on what they think about loyalty of the players to the organization that they play for.
Cal Ripken.
Yeah. Well, it is different than it used to be, certainly. But the old system was based on an unfair advantage to the owners and to the management. The pendulum was too far in one direction. Now the pendulum has swung quite a lot in the other direction in terms of player mobility, player rights, player benefits, player opportunities. So at some point, it would be nice to get back to a different system, but we'll never get back to the system that you seem to be remembering so fondly, because that did prevent players from having the kinds of choices and opportunities that they now have. I do think the players who come into a clubhouse, however, these days, even if their stay may be relatively short, have an intensity, competitiveness about them that gives them a strong sense of loyalty and commitment, at least for the short time that they are here. And many of our players make an effort, however brief their stay may be, to involve themselves in the community. Kevin Millar has been here for a year and a half. He's been buying tickets for people in this community and trying to associate himself with charities and philanthropic activities in this community since the day he arrived. So it's not the same as it used to be, but there still is a feeling of loyalty and identification that these players have.
And I'd be curious, and Jerry too, and maybe Roger, what the players say about this.
Yes. Well, the players, obviously are in a different time. They're all represented by lawyers or agents or whatever who, I think one thing we have to remember is a lot of these players, very young. And I know I certainly think differently at the age of 51 than I did at 25. And, a lot of these players are certainly led by their representatives and go the way, and maybe it's not a way that they want to go. But it's amazing how petty things get with contracts. It's incredible. I had one experience as a free agent. A lot of negotiations happened through the season, and it was terrible. It was an awful thing to go through. Every time you had a bad session, that affected the way I went about my job. It was not a good thing at all. But, today's game is so different. The day of the Cal Ripken, you're not going to see much of that anymore. It bothers me. What bothers me is, like today, for example, I pick up the newspaper and Derek Lowe announces that, he's not going to be here anymore after next year. This is the start of the season. We're opening up in Baltimore on Sunday night. Let's get focused on what we got to get done. I don't care about that. We'll deal with that when that comes up. But those are the kind of comments that are made that bother me.
And sir?
I hesitate to make this the last question of a very interesting evening, but should Pete Rose be allowed to join the Hall of Fame, and should he be allowed to manage?
No.
No. It's a tough one for me because I've got to be honest with you. He's one of the players that I really respected and looked up to because he was not a player that was blessed with great ability. But he certainly played every single game like it was the last game he was going to be played, and that's really what you want every baseball player to do. But I saw the interview he did with Charles, and he didn't seem like he was ready to give it up.
I don't think he should be in the Hall of Fame. I think the way he's comported himself since the original suspension has done more damage to baseball than the original crime.
Thank you.
Well, I think he should never be permitted to work in the game or to manage in the game. That was part of the question. The question of the Hall of Fame, it seems to me, only appropriate after quite a long period of penance, and at some point that period will pass, and he probably should be in the Hall of Fame, but he should not be in baseball.
I would, since I did the interview with him, I will comment on this because I spent about a week with him, and I would, with great temerity, I take issue with the gentleman from Madison Avenue to my right. I'd put him in the Hall of Fame. There have been, I think it's 18 ball players who have been suspended for life from baseball. There is a provision in the rules of baseball to apply for reinstatement. Rose is the first one to do it. So he would be the first one to be reinstated in any way if they let him into the Hall of Fame. If you equate it to a criminal who gets a life sentence, he has spent 14 years in banishment or prison, and he was earning $2 million a year at the time as a manager that he was kicked out of baseball. 14 years, let's say he would be managing for 10 of those, it's a $20 million fine. I think that's enough, and I would let him into the Hall of Fame where his records certainly warrant his being. He did not do what the 1919 White Sox did, which was to bet against his team. I believe him that he only bet for his team. When you ask him what record he treasures most of all of his records, and he knows every one he holds, he says 1982. And I'm thinking back, what happened in 1982? 1982 is the number of games that he played in when he was on the winning side in the major leagues. And he says that's more than any athlete in the history of professional sport, and that's the record I'm most proud of. His competitive spirit, I think, would never let him bet against his team. I think he only bet for his team. I'd put him in the Hall of Fame. I sure the hell wouldn't let him back in baseball.
Yeah, can I speak to that a little bit, though? Betting for your team, or betting at all, is bad, regardless of for or against, because if he's managing the Reds and it's a 4-game series and he bets on 3 games, as far as I'm concerned, the 4th game he's betting against them because he's not betting at all. And the way you deploy pitchers, you're fooling with the integrity of the game. We've been here tonight. No one talks about the Buckner era being the games in the bag or Grady's.
And
the gamblers got to him, and so you need to have that trust of the fans that the game is not fixed. And when you have a manager betting for his team and then some days not betting, I'm sorry, it's just as bad in my view.
Did you ever see him? Did you ever see him not play or not manage all out? I understand you can't.
On the days he was managing and didn't bet in his team, as far as I'm concerned, he was not managing all out. He didn't need those games.
He said at that infamous meeting after the game down in Atlanta, he had a press conference, and he said that, I'm sorry, this is after in his confession, he said he never used inside information. He never went inside information when betting. He was a manager. He had inside information. I agree with Dan, the way he managed. If you've got a lot of money riding on a game, the way you treat your pitchers is going to affect the outcome, not of that game, but tomorrow's game and the game after that. This is dishonest. He's played with this all his time. He has not a moment of candor in the 18 years this has happened. And I admire him as much as any player I've ever seen for the way he played to the utmost limit of his ability. But I don't think that he deserves any respect from baseball.
Which is part of what makes this game great, that we can argue about it for hours and hours and hours, and in the long run, nobody's going to get hurt because of it. No bombs will fall. Nobody will go broke. Nobody will lose a job. This room, it's a pleasure to be in this setting and in this room, I think, for all of us. In this room normally are discussed issues of macroeconomics, of foreign policy, of war and peace. And tonight we really got to the most important issue of the day, and I appreciate you all being here.